Hello and welcome to Stories That Shape Us. My name is Joanna Daniel. Today, I want to talk about three things that I've noticed about mental health in churches. I've been speaking in churches for many years, and these are things that I've noticed that I want to share because I know lots of people struggle, and especially since I've been doing interviews with the authors from the Come See a Man devotional series. Some of the things that I've heard, and I can attest to these things because I've seen and I've heard them as well. So number one, people aren't ready to change. People aren't ready to change their view about mental health. People aren't ready to embrace and accept sometimes therapy, therapeutic language. And as much as lots of people need it, and there are lots of people that are hurting, there's so many people that aren't ready for the conversation, and there's no room for them for this conversation to happen in the groups that they're in or in the spaces that they're leading. And sometimes how mental health is seen and dealt with comes from the top. And when people at the top aren't ready to have the conversation, then it trickles down into the congregation. And it can cause a lot of harm to those who are in your congregation and they're struggling. And number two, some people will never be ready. So there's those people who aren't ready, sometimes out of ignorance, sometimes out of lack of information, sometimes because they're following, sometimes they're in leadership, and because of stereotypes, they don't know, right? But then there's those people who will never be ready. And these people are again in leadership. They lead groups of people and they have lots of influence, and they'll never be ready sometimes because being ready to hear and talk about mental health would mean that they'll have to address their own pain. And there are people who will never be prepared to address their own pain, so they're harsh, they're critical, they're judgmental, they lack compassion, they're not loving, they're unkind. They're everything opposite to what the fruit of the Spirit says that we should be. If we read Galatians 5:22 and 23, we kind of like have a guideline of how we should be, what the kind of space the church should be. But the people who will never be ready to embrace mental health, to listen to your depression story, to listen to the impact of the trauma, to offer compassion and kindness, are people often who have their own pain. And because they'll never be, they're not prepared, they live in hiding for many different reasons. And so, because of that, they are the ones, sometimes when people leave church because of hurt, it's coming from this group of people. They have great influence. They are the ones that are frank, and they're not frank. They're not called frank, but they are the ones that are frank and will tell you off and will challenge you and will speak, and they're the ones that say harsh things, and they're the ones that are confrontational and critical, and sometimes they do it with using spiritual language with a scripture to back it up, and it can be really hard to swallow because it's so opposite to what we should be. The only trouble with this group of people and the damage that they do is they tend to target the people who are vulnerable, the people who are struggling, the people who come for love and care and support is met sometimes mostly by these people who will never be prepared to change, and they cause a lot of harm. I think the call for leadership is to be able to recognize we lead well when we know the people that are in our organization, the people that are working with us or serving with us. And when we can manage those characters, we know we can help to protect the vulnerable. I think it's the responsibility of leadership to protect people in your congregation that are vulnerable. You need to know who those people are, and so you can protect them from the ones that you know are going to be harsh and critical. You need to be able to get in there before they get in there and causes harm and damage, because ultimately if it happens on our watch as leaders, then we're responsible. And if you've ever been hurt in church by the people who, I think the people who push the hardest against people with depression and anxiety, or the people who push against you talking about your past and talking about the pain of your past, are the people who really need support. But again, because they're in hiding, they can't make themselves hear you, and they don't have room or capacity to offer sympathy because they're hiding from themselves. And then there are the people who are hiding because of the pain that they're in. So some people are not ready because of information, lack of information, not sure. Sometimes they're influenced by other people. And then number two is the people who will never be ready because they're hiding from their pain. Now, sometimes it's a knowing hiding. Oftentimes, these people, they know it's happening. They know they're in pain. They know this thing hurts, but they want to pretend and wear a mask and appear to have it together. So they will never go get help. They have great influence, they have great impact, and the harm that they cause can be far reaching. And number three is a group of people who are hiding because sometimes they're hiding from the group number two. If the people in group number two, because they're influential, you might have something that you need help with, but you're struggling because you really want to be like people in group number two because they look spiritually together. They look like they have it all together. They say all the right things. They act in all the right ways. And because of that, have the appearance of having it together, because you're struggling and you feel you shouldn't struggle because they don't struggle. They are. They're just lashing out and using it to harm people. So if you're in group number three that you're hiding because you feel you shouldn't, I want you to know that life isn't neat. Sin entered this world and we are in pain. And if you've had something happen to you, it's important that you get support. It's important that you get support. It's sometimes the overriding voice in churches can be people in group number two. They speak the loudest. If they're not in leadership, they have the ear of leadership. They do a lot of teaching. And so it can be really difficult to separate their voice from the voice of God, or to find anybody with compassion in a congregation where people like that exist. But they are there. And there might be a needle in a haystack, but they are there. And I want you to know, the conversation that I did last night with Joyce, that she was in church and she was invisible. If you go back and watch the podcast for last night, or for those who are listening, if you listen to yesterday's podcast, you'll hear her talk about her come see a man moment, how she was proving God over and over and over again. And because she was having these experiences with him, because she was holding him to his word, she was able to, in times of crisis, to call on him and ask him to do it again. To do what you did last year, do it again. What you did last month, do it again. And so despite people in group number one and two, in the places where she worshiped, she was able to forge her own relationship with God. And that's what I want to encourage you. He won't judge you because of your mental health. He never will. He understands depression. He understands anxiety. He understands psychosis. He understands all of it. And there are many places through scripture where he promised to heal our broken hearts and bind up our wounds. So if you're in places where you feel like your heart is being broken as opposed to healed, just know that those people are not representing him, and that there are places and spaces, and we might have to search long and hard to find it, but I believe it exists, where we will find people who understand brokenheartedness, who understands how to walk beside the hurting, who are prepared to do it long term and do the distance with you. So don't leave and close yourself in and stay in the in hiding group because you're afraid and you feel like you should be like. Believe me, you don't want to be. What you want to be is learn how to cast your cares upon him, how to get support for the things that are troubling to you, so that you can find your way out and you can get the help that you need to be whole and healed. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Stories That Shape Us. I hope you'll join me on the next story.